In the last year or so, Australia's witnessed a few rip-roaring public examples of misogyny. There was the ever-reliable Sam Newman, who molested a mock-up of a female journalist, then a few months later alluded to his wish to ejaculate over a female politician. There was Troy Buswell, the Western Australian opposition leader, who admitted to snapping a colleague's bra strap and sniffing a female staffer's chair. And there was the camper van hire company Wicked Campers, which was brought to public attention for their delightful slogans painted on their vans, such as, "Women are like banks, once you withdraw you lose interest, and if God was a woman, sperm would taste like chocolate." Something all of these cases of outright misogyny had in common, apart from the cringe factor, is that the misogyny was called out and the perpetrators were publicly and widely condemned. But the attention given to high-profile, obvious cases like these can obscure the fact that most of the sexism women face every day is so subtle that both victims and perpetrators often fail to notice it. And when I say victims and perpetrators, I acknowledge that most of us are both. The thing is that feminism has been amazingly successful. We have equal pay legislation, laws against sexual harassment and discrimination. We have relatively good access to contraception and abortion services. Women can borrow money and buy a house without a man's co-signature, and husbands no longer have legal permission to rape their wives. And even better, we know that most of the time we don't need to appeal to these legal protections or legislated rights. We know that most men would no sooner sexually harass a colleague or rape their wife than they would purchase a slave or beat their kids. Laws have changed and attitudes have changed, and both are important. But they haven't changed enough. And they haven't even changed as much as most people think they have. While it's true that outright, unashamed, officially sanctioned sexism is rare, the social and economic structures in which we all live are threaded with sexist policies and attitudes, and they're so deeply ingrained and so insidious that those of us who point them out risk sounding like conspiracy theorists, or whiners, or victims, or, God forbid, man-haters. A researcher at Georgetown University, Kathy Tinsley, conducted some research in which participants were asked to comment on the performance of executives who were seen negotiating various work-related situations. Tinsley found that female executives were viewed negatively for displaying the exact same behaviour that was judged appropriate when displayed by the men. What was really interesting about this research is that Tinsley went back and spoke to the respondents, and she found that most were really surprised that they had rated the men and women differently. They had no idea that they were responding to a person's gender until the difference in assessments they'd given was pointed out to them. Also significant here was that women were as likely as men to criticise the female executives. As Tinsley wrote, "This is not a gender war. Women are not fighting men. They are fighting our culture, our prescribed set of norms that constrain their behaviour into a rigid set of appropriate categories." And Tinsley's statement holds as true outside of the boardroom as in it. Gender-based injustice is rarely a matter of terrible men intentionally insulting or oppressing women, but of society clinging either unwittingly or unquestioningly to outdated gender stereotypes. Many of us who were born after the success of the 1970s women's liberation movement were raised to think of ourselves as people, not genders. We grew up believing that being female would not affect our opportunities or choices. We rejected the idea that women were oppressed, and if we thought about feminism at all, it was as an historical movement with no relevance to our futures. And there's a fantastic expression I heard a couple of years ago. It takes life to make a feminist. And this has been true for me, and for many of the 30-something women I know. Genuinely believing that sexism was dead, we moved out into the worlds of work and marriage and motherhood, and we got a hell of a shock. We realised that personal declarations of gender blindness are no defence against a world that insists on defining women by their sex. We realise that the limitless choices women have are oddly less limitless than the choices of men. And we realise that the political, economic, sexual, professional, social and domestic equality is far from realised, and that post-feminism is a media myth. We realised that quite accidentally we'd become feminists, and it was simply life that was to blame. For some women it happens much sooner, for others it does take a lifetime. In any case, I'd really like to speed up the process. To demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about, to demonstrate how everyday misogyny and institutionalised sexism can affect the opportunities and choices of women, I want to tell you a story. Now, it's not a true story in the strictest sense of the word. I'm a novelist first, and the habit of inventing people is hard to shake. But it's true in its particulars. Everything that happens in this story has happened to women I know or who I've interviewed. We begin with a 5-year-old girl. She's walking through the gates on her first day of school. I'm going to call her Edith in honour of the first woman to be elected to an Australian Parliament. Now, young Edith, like her namesake, is Anglo-Australian, middle class, healthy and able-bodied. So she is, by world standards, extremely privileged. She doesn't know this. All she knows is she's walking into a world full of friends and adventure and learning. The idea that the kids wearing the cute green dresses would be treated any differently to the kids wearing cute grey shorts doesn't occur to her. Now, Edith has spent a lot of time playing with her cousins, and her favourite things to do are wrestling, rumbling and making messes with anything mud-like in texture. But on her first day at school, she learns that these are activities for the kids in grey shorts, not for the kids in green dresses. By the end of the school day, she's furious, and she confronts her parents. "Why did you make me be a girl? Girls are boring." Her parents are heartbroken. They realise that in trying to raise a gender-blind girl, they may have inadvertently contributed to the message that girls are not as good or fun as boys. For example, they've always taken care to point out that Disney princesses do nothing but whine and look pretty and get rescued, and isn't that dull? Wouldn't she rather be off having adventures, doing the rescuing? But rather than hearing a criticism of Disney princesses, little Edith has heard a criticism of females. And where her parents always steered her away from lacy, frilly dresses because they get in the way of physical play, Edith has internalised the disdain for such clothing and applied it to the kindergarten dress-up box. Princess dress equals female equals bad. Comfy clothes and superhero costumes equals boys equals fun. Anyway, with the help of her teacher and her parents, Edith learns to compromise. She learns to play shops with the girls at school and save the wrestling for when her cousins visit on the weekends. Fast forward a few years. Edith goes to watch one of her boy cousins play footy. She listens to the coach and some of the parents shouting at the players and notices something really weird. When people want to insult the boys, they call them girls. She starts paying attention in other situations and realises that all of the worst insults are related to being female. Girly, sissy, pussy, skirt. She learns that the absolute worst swear word you can ever say is slang for female genitals. The other terrible insult that she's heard used is gay. Around the beginning of high school, Edith works out that the kind of person who uses gay as an insult is the kind of person who links homosexual men with femininity and thinks femininity is bad. Nancy, pansy, swish when you walk, talk in a high voice, care about fashion and shoes. Gay, feminine, same thing, all bad. She finds it kind of interesting, but not really something to worry about, because they're just words. Jump forward again. Edith is now 16. If you ask her whether she's a feminist, she'll laugh at you. Her access to education, to travel, to any career she wants is exactly the same as that of all the boys in her class. In fact, the girls she knows are smarter, more assured, and more mature than the boys. She thinks anyone bitching about sexism needs a reality check. Ever heard of poverty, global warming, whale slaughter? But yes, okay, if you push the subject, there are a few small gender-related things that bother her. She's uncomfortable, for example, in sex ed class. The teacher talks as though the boys, many of whom are great friends of Edith's, are beasts, unable to control their raging, powerful sex drives. And she poses Edith and her girlfriends as gatekeepers for these boys. And this is actually at odds with Edith's experience, yet lots of people seem to agree that this is just the way things are. In the movies and on TV, women are always fighting off men, and men are always coming up with schemes to get women to have sex with them. If it's a comedy, the schemes are wacky. If it's a drama, the schemes are violent. Either way, sex education, telly, the movies, jokes told by drunken uncles at family barbecues, comments made by religious leaders on the news, it all adds up to men being voracious animals, chasing sex at any cost, and women having to be always on alert, lest they send out the wrong signals and fail to keep the all-powerful male sex drive in check. Of course, being straight, Edith doesn't even notice that the gay girls at her school are receiving an even more confusing message, both from sex education and the wider culture. Since female sexuality is passive and defensive, since it's always a reaction, either positive or negative, to male desire, lesbians must never have sex. Must be why the teacher never bothers with detailing safe sex procedures for lesbians, because everyone knows sex only happens when there's a penis involved. Anyway, Edith now plays footy with her mixed-sex group of friends, and there's one boy in particular that she really likes. But she wonders why he doesn't make a move on her, because isn't that what boys do? Maybe, she thinks, I'm not sexy enough. She starts buying Cosmopolitan, going for leg waxes, eyebrow waxes, bikini waxes, fake tans, highlights, manicure, pedicure. She buys cleansing gel, toner, day and night moisturiser, eye cream, exfoliating scrub. She gets up 20 minutes earlier each day to make up her face so it looks natural. That's tinted moisturiser, subtle eye makeup, cream blush, lip gloss. And one night she's over at the house of this boy she likes, finally, and she peeks inside his bathroom cabinet. She sees pimple gel, electric shaver, toothpaste and toothbrush. And she feels ashamed that she has to try so hard to get him to like her, and she likes him exactly as he is. Still though, boys are only a tiny part of life. In every other way, life is great. Compared to the opportunities her mum and grandma had at her age, she's living the feminist dream. Then she gets her first job. She has to find a way to pay for all that beauty crap. Thursday nights and weekends in a news agency. One night as she's helping the boss lock up, he grabs her around the waist and tries to kiss her. She tells him to stop and he steps away immediately. But he crankily tells her she shouldn't wear such tight skirts if she doesn't want things like this to happen. So on her next shift, he grabs her ass and tells her she looks even hotter in jeans. Now, despite all the warnings about men and their beastly desires, Edith really didn't expect something like this to happen. Partly because she knows there are laws against sexual harassment at work, but mostly because her boss is only 30 or so. Didn't men like that retire back in the dark ages when people still thought Benny Hill was funny? What Edith doesn't realise at the time is that her experience is far from unusual. According to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, around 30% of women and 7% of men report being sexually harassed at work. When Elizabeth Broderick, the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, conducted her nationwide listening tour last year, she heard about sexual harassment, she said, in every state, industry and workplace that she visited. She wrote in her report, and I'll quote, that sexual harassment appears to be present across all levels of the workplace. In some industries, it was reported to be the norm, and many fear it would be nearly impossible to wipe out. Victims of sexual harassment justifiably fear making a complaint will only lead to further victimisation. And the idea that a complaint made to an employer could be resolved positively was considered a fairy tale by some. An outcome for many victims of sexual harassment was instead to leave their workplace or even change career paths if they worked in a small industry. Edith hasn't read that report, and so she doesn't know any of this. She doesn't know either that young women starting out in the workforce are particularly vulnerable. She doesn't even know for sure if what happened was harassment. And if it is, she doesn't know what to do about it. I mean, who do you go to when the boss is the harasser? And it's not like she's going to go to the police for something like this. One of her close friends was raped last year by a bloke they both know. And when she went to the police, it was excruciating. They treated her like a criminal. They asked her the same questions over and over. What was she wearing? How much she drank? How many boys she'd had sex with? She had to have a medical examination that hurt almost as much as the rape. And it was all for nothing. because evidence of intercourse doesn't prove forced sex. The guy was never charged. And actually, Edith's heard similar stories, which isn't surprising given that 1 in 5 Australian women over 15 are victims of sexual violence. It's also not surprising that none of the girls Edith knows have seen their rapists jailed. An estimated 80% of rapes aren't reported to police in the first place. Of those that are, 90% are investigated. 65% of the investigated cases, a suspect is identified, but charges are made against only 20%. Of that 20%, only 60% end up in court, where the conviction rate is 35%, which is, by the way, half that of all other criminal matters. That's a lot of percentages I've just thrown out. I'll simplify. Of the total number of rapes committed in Australia, only 1% end in conviction. Also on Edith's mind, as she decides what to do about her boss, is a news report she read recently that said 1 in 6 Victorians agreed that women often say no to sex when they mean yes, and that over 1 in 10 believe that women who are sexually harassed should just sort it out themselves. She can't imagine going through even a 100th of what her friend who was raped went through. She can't imagine battling all those nasty attitudes and standing up to all that judgment over an attempted kiss and a couple of sleazy comments. So she sorts it out herself. She resigns the job. It's simpler. Anyway, she's 18 and at uni now, and there's too much to be excited about to dwell on unpleasant situations. There's an active feminist group on campus, but if anything, they turn Edith off a bit. She agrees with a lot of the things they say, but they're always so angry. She doesn't understand why they can't be more positive. There are lots of good things about being female, and in terms of academic success at Edith's uni and many others, women are totally kicking ass. Fast forward again. First full-time job. And again, it seems that Edith is on exactly equal footing with the young men starting out with her. Yes, there are again some minor issues. For one thing, the pervasive message that she doesn't look good enough is not just getting more intense, but she's learning that it might have consequences beyond her own self-esteem. Marie Claire magazine in June 2007 reported on some UK research that indicated a quarter of employers admitted they were more likely to hire a woman who wore makeup than one who didn't. In the magazine feature, which was titled, "How Does Your Makeup Affect Your Career?" the magazine tested the findings for itself by presenting a woman in 6 makeup guises, from underplayed to overstated, and put her before a panel of recruitment experts. With no makeup and tied back hair, she was given a score of 12 out of 30. With lots of makeup, her score was only slightly better, 14 out of 30. The winning look, with a score of 27 out of 30, had blow-dried hair, visible but subtle eye makeup, and natural-looking lipstick. It's probably unnecessary to add that there was no similar hair and makeup test for prospective male employees. And yeah, Edith can and probably should stop reading magazines whose career advice consists of makeup tips. But the thing is, even if she avoids all the glossy magazines, she will, like every other woman in our society, be bombarded with beauty advice from the minute she wakes up to the minute she closes her eyes at night. The morning news broadcast includes a segment on the safety of Botox, which everyone is getting. The side of the bus has an ad about slimming down in 6 weeks. Her manager tells her about a conditioning spray that will fix that frizz problem. Her assistant says she has to try this new diet. The newspaper has a lift-out summer detox plan. The evening news report repeats the morning's Botox story and adds one about a new scientific study that proves the evolutionary basis of men's preference for women with small waists. Edith would have to institute a total media blackout, work from home, and be a hermit socially to escape the message that as a woman she will never be okay as she is. There's always something that could be made better, thinner, prettier, smoother, neater, sexier. And I do mean a total media blackout. That Marie Claire makeup story was repeated, not literally but in spirit, in the London newspaper The Times. I mean, that's a proper newspaper, right? And there it was, the very important news, telling us 64% of company directors said that women who wore makeup look more professional, and 18% of directors said that women who do not wear makeup look like they can't be bothered to make an effort. Now, although this was in a generally respected newspaper, it was in the life and style section. So I guess those of us who don't want to be lectured on how much eyeliner to wear could just skip that section. But here's what's really annoying. Because of the way so-called women's issues are marginalised by the mainstream media, a woman who avoids all the beauty and fashion stuff and only reads the news, business and analysis, say, may actually miss out on useful information. A recent example. The New York Times in May ran a piece about the gender imbalance in science, engineering and technology. The report detailed the ways in which women are routinely harassed, demeaned, held back and pushed out in these industries, which maintain, according to one of the researchers, a pervasive macho culture. It was an important, in-depth, useful article that discussed real-world strategies and solutions to the problem, and it didn't mention high heels or makeup even once. So what's the problem? Well, the article, which I'll repeat, had nothing whatever to do with fashion, beauty, diets, was in the fashion and style section of the paper. Now, how many of the people who really needed to read that report, the macho men of science and engineering, their managers, human resource people, how many of them regularly read fashion and style? Sorry, this is trivial stuff. Back to our girls' career progression. Edith's doing well. She's wearing the right amount of makeup, dressing for success, as well as, of course, working the same or longer hours than her colleagues. She's getting increasingly complex assignments, feeling like a valued, respected member of the team. And then a male colleague with her same workload and duties has a few too many drinks at the Christmas party and lets slip his salary. Edith is shocked that this bloke earns 15% more than she does. She does some detective work and discovers that she, as the only female in her team, earns less than every other member. This doesn't seem right, but she knows that gender-based pay discrimination is illegal. And so it must really be, as her boss and then her small inner voice of self-doubt will tell her, that her work's just not worth as much for one reason or another. She feels this pay difference as a personal failing, not realising that she's perfectly typical, that women's full-time earnings in this country in 2007 were on average only 84% of male full-time earnings, which is bad enough. But the worst thing is that this was down a percentage point from 2005. So the pay gap between men and women is actually widening.